We're well into our 20th year, representing a broad range of interests across North East Scotland and beyond, all either active or actively interested in working within the renewable energy and energy transition sectors. So we're up at 247 members this week. The number has been growing quite dramatically over the last year or so. It's something like 70% growth for the group, which is absolutely fantastic. On top of that, we've added to our board. I can see that Alfonso has also joined us this afternoon. So nice to see Alfonso from Aberdeen University. We're feeling very confident about the future. We are setting ourselves up for a big event at the end of the year at the Press and Journal Live, which is the Energy Futures Conference and Exhibition. I'm sure most of you will have heard about that. We're not for profit. We exist with the goodwill and the sort of sponsorship from our various member interests and associate members. We're very well known for the sort of networking space that we have created in terms of renewables and the energy transition. And of course, most famously for our work on the Aberdeen offshore wind farm. Now, just in recent years, we've really seen a broadening of the membership as well to cover not just primary energy, but also to see growing interest from community and household interests as well. So when you think about the breadth of the energy transition, we're really sort of quite representative and inclusive. And I think that's a very important element for our group. We have 4 other networks. I will shortly introduce Rod, but we have 4 other networks. That includes the communications one, chaired by Stephen Christie from BP. We have Paul Robertson from Big Partnership chairing our policy group. Neil McIntosh from Aberdeen International Associates chairing our supply chain and technology group. I'm very pleased that we have Charlotte Hartley and Chrisanne Robertson chairing the Young Energy Professionals group from Starega and Verloon, respectively. So it's been something that has evolved over the last year or so, just in terms of, I guess, a little bit of a sort of reaction to some of the impacts of COVID-19. But we've really built and strengthened these networks. The communications one started with a similar number to today, around 14 or 15 people, and now has about 50 or so joining each time. So it's an exciting time to be involved in Areg, lots of opportunities ahead. And I'd like to, at this point, hand over to Rod, who's the Legal Director of Corporate Finance with Mick Roberts here in Aberdeen. I have to say, Rod's been a fantastic long-term supporter of Areg. He brings passion and energy to everything he's involved with, and therefore I'm absolutely delighted that he's agreed to become the chair of this professional services network. And I'm going to hand it over to Rod.
Thank you, David. That was a very informative introduction. I really appreciate that. And I'm very, very excited to be kicking off this group with you all today, the pioneers, if you like, for a professional services network. So a bit about me, perhaps, would be helpful. So as I say, I'm in the chair with this networking group, and I'll come on to tell you a little bit about what our aims and goals are. But I'm a commercial lawyer, as David's pointed out. I've got an energy background, although not surprisingly, being based in Aberdeen, the energy focus of my practice has been on oil and gas, and to a lesser degree on decommissioning. However, I've had a strong interest in renewable energy for some time, and Areg were the spark that lit my fire, so to speak. And through involvement with Areg as one of its general counsel, I was involved in the structure of Areg, corporate structure, and also its interest in the Aberdeen Bay wind farm, which is now operated by Vattenfall. So I have a reasonably long interest in renewable energy, but even so, a lot of it still, is unknown to me. It's a kind of, there's a buzzword about renewables, there's a buzzword about transitional energy, but let's be honest, or I'll be honest, because I think that's the best way forward. I'm not always entirely sure what's meant for that or how that translates into my work, into my practice, and how I can, provide my skills to the businesses that are operating within that sector. And so this is an ideal opportunity. This group is really formed to enable us, and by us I mean me, you, and other colleagues who might join us in the future and peers, to really demystify the buzzwords, to look into what it means locally and internationally to be involved in renewable energy. And for my part, I've sat back and I've looked at it as a lawyer and I've thought, well, what does this mean? Is there anything to be afraid of here? And the answer is no, because ultimately the same problems that face businesses in oil and gas or in agriculture or in any other sector also resonate with companies that operate within the renewable space, be that as operators or in the supply chain. There might be nuances where there are differences in custom and practice or best practice, but ultimately, the fundamental issues are the same. And I, as a lawyer, can just as easily help someone in the renewable space as I can in the oil and gas space. And that's the same for each of you in your own separate disciplines. So I think together, it's great that we can create this safe space that we can learn together, share information, share ideas, and really get going as a professional services sector to ultimately with the goal of creating more work for you, which is why ultimately we're all engaged in our businesses, and also to provide the same kind of quality of professional services as the oil and gas sector has enjoyed for many years. Because only by doing that do we keep that work locally here. Otherwise, I'm sorry to say, it will go elsewhere. And so we're effectively the champions, if you like, for professional services. And the more people we can involve in this group, I want it to be a collaborative and cooperative initiative. I would like lawyers from other firms other than my own to join. I would like to see various practitioners from different disciplines joining and sharing information and knowledge in a collaborative way, to just facilitate growth in knowledge, growth in opportunity, and growth in contacts. Now, a lot of the content for future sessions is going to be online. It's just so much easier for us all. We're all busy. And so we'll try to stick to that format for our quarterly sessions on the whole. However, there's nothing like meeting people in person, and we're definitely going to facilitate the opportunity to get together and to get to know each other in person and to share ideas in a social setting. And so if there are any ideas that any of you have that you would like to explore in relation to that, please feed that back to us and we'll look at maybe introducing some get-togethers. We'll come on to this later in the session, but a natural opportunity to get together might be around our exhibition and conference on November 15th, which David might allude to when he takes the microphone again in a wee bit, but there'll be opportunities for us there to get together and also to raise the profile of our businesses through sponsorship, through taking a table at our dinner, and through just attending the event. So fantastic opportunities. I'm very, very excited by what this group might achieve. And also, I would quite like to facilitate the opportunity for each of you or others who may join us in the future to shine a light on their own business or themselves individually. Tell us where you're at on the journey to working within the renewable sector. So we might have maybe 1 to 3 5-minute slots on future sessions where we get to know our network. And that will give you and others the opportunity, as I say, to tell us a bit about yourself. If there are any, this is not a diktat, so if there are any things that you would like to see included within the network, I'd really love to hear from you. It's not about me telling you this is how the network should be. It's about you guys getting value out of it, and however you see value, run it past me, and we'd happily have a look at what we can do to include that in future sessions. So, circling back to where I started in this, I fully intend to grow my knowledge in the renewable space, and I hope that you guys get the opportunity to too. There's no such thing as a daft question. So at any point, if anyone feels that, you know what, I really don't understand what he's on about there or she's on about there, please, you know, whether you feed that anonymously through, Beverly, our administrator who's on the call, or you're bold enough to put your hand in there, please feel free to do that. This should be a safe space where there's no such thing as a silly question. Now, hopefully that's given you a flavour for what the network's about. In future sessions, we're going to look to engage with operators and service companies within the renewable space, as well as other large organisations, to allow you to get to meet the players within renewables. Today, very kindly, one of our members, STC Inicio, who are engaged in various different sectors, oil and gas, renewable energy, and others, have very kindly agreed to give us a little bit of a chat today. And I'll come back to that. But first, in the spirit of demystifying renewable energy, making it understandable, and allowing us to see the opportunities that are out there, David, our CEO, has very kindly agreed to give us a very high-level chat on how renewable energy is looking just now for us in this region. And so enough from me for now, and over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. And the challenge is for me not to use buzzwords, and I will do my utmost not to use buzzwords. However, I'd just like to, first of all, underline, just from a personal experience perspective, just how important professional services have been, certainly for some of the projects that I've been involved with, but right across the industry. My experience on the sort of Aberdeen Bay and the Clash and Darragh wind farm projects has been working with just such a wide range of people, from accountants to legal services to environmental specialists to people that run bird radars, archaeologists, marine life experts, land agreement specialists, grid connection advisors, and the public interest piece is in here as well. And I think that's very important from a public and professional services perspective. Dare I say, in some of the sort of appeal process and the right of reply that people have now within consultation processes. So we shouldn't imagine that everything is just linear and straightforward. There are sometimes professional advice, professional studies are needed along the way to reach that point of consent and that point where you can actually go and build things today. But my own experience has been, without the professional services, some of these projects just wouldn't have occurred. There were situations on Aberdeen Bay that we don't need to go into, but the legal support within that and the sort of consultation and the collaboration with other parties in Aberdeen was very fundamental to getting from a point of design to a point of construction. But you asked, Rod, more for I guess a sort of view on the landscape. And I think the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that we've got some actions that are published in writing now in terms of policy, and that would be the Scottish 2045 net zero target, the 2050 UK net zero targets. We're going to see, pardon me, we're going to see some practical implications in the very mid to near future, in terms of no new petrol cars being sold by 2030, no new hybrids being sold by 2035. But there's a societal piece here, but there's the industry piece. And for this north of Scotland, this the whole industry that surrounds us here, we're very fortunate, I think, in terms of where we are in Aberdeen and where we're at the centre of things. For example, the ScotWind round, the developing offshore fixed and floating schemes for ScotWind 1, ScotWind 2. There's also an electrification round, which is going to see some of their projects in the water first to try and help decarbonise the sort of offshore oil and gas operations. And these will be really important projects. But build on to wind, the hydrogen ambitions, the whole work that Aberdeen City Council is doing to create a hydrogen hub to build on some of their existing hydrogen efforts. We've got one of the largest hydrogen bus fleets in Europe, but they'll be looking to expand that whole sort of hydrogen piece. And of course, that could include areas such as heating and transport and changes for society, changes for the city, and it will have a ripple effect across the region as we look at perhaps other sort of transportation issues for hydrogen. So lots of interesting things there. I keep mentioning the broader societal transition, and I think that is going to have a huge part to play as well. Again, areas like heating and transport, but also around lifestyle choices, people, communities, organizations looking at how they can become more sustainable, adopting renewable energies, I hope, in a way that we've just never seen before. And so the infrastructure piece, really important. And infrastructure, you've got all the primary energy generation and the science piece and the new technology and innovation piece, but we'll need infrastructure in our towns and cities as well. And that's going to create work, and it's going to create interest for all sorts of disciplines, including the professional services. I talked about the optimism piece for the north of Scotland, and we have 50 years of oil and gas experience in this city, and you talked about that, Rod, being able to provide the same level of professional services that industry has both enjoyed and has been necessary to see that incredible growth within oil and gas. We're seeing some amazing steps with energy transition already, very, very early indications that we're going to be leaders in this space. The north of Scotland is going to do well on this activity. We're seeing some fantastic work from the ETZ, from the NZTC, from the universities, from the Port of Aberdeen, to name but a very, very few, beginning to take some leading roles and creating some world-class projects, I believe, in terms of winning through the energy transition. So that's a very broad brush strokes, but I would say the two things I would say are track record and confidence. And with that, you can achieve a lot in the future.
That's great. Thank you very much, David. That's very useful indeed. And what we'll do is, if there were any questions on David's chat there, then maybe we'll have a couple of minutes at the end to allow you the opportunity just to drill into that a bit deeper if you wish to. Otherwise, for now, we're going to move on to discuss our next topic for today, and really what we're looking at today as our kind of headline topic is, I suppose, risk. And risk, I mean, regardless of the sector that we're operating in, regardless of which profession we're engaged in, one of the key and fundamental jobs of the professional advisor is to mitigate risk for our clients in one way or another. So it's to, the professional's job is to maximize return and to mitigate against risk and liability. In my own profession, one of the ways that we generally are asked to assist clients with that is through a careful review and drafting of contracts to ensure that there is a clear expression of the rights in favour of and the obligations incumbent upon their businesses. And I guess in a future session, we'll come back to that and we'll talk about best practice within contracting. Now, each of you, as I say, plays a vital role in risk mitigation, whether that's from the perspective of protecting the goodwill of a business, perhaps through its intellectual property protection or PR and marketing. There are various ways that can be done, or indeed to ensuring that the business is trading on a sound financial footing, either through accountancy or perhaps banking professionals, or through personnel and training. So, there are numerous ways that each of us can assist businesses in risk mitigation. There might, as I suggested earlier, be slight variations in practice and custom from sector to sector, but to a material extent, advice that's good for one client in one sector is generally going to be sound advice for a client in another. So again, with the focus on you as a professionals group, if you feel that there are any particular skills that your business or organisation brings to the table that you would like to tell the group about in the future, drop us a line. We'd be happy to hear from you and give you the opportunity to engage with everyone. Now, one of our members, and I mentioned him earlier on, is very much focused on risk mitigation and all the various ways and tools that you can adopt to do so, and that's STC Initio, and I'm really delighted to have them along today. And indeed, we've not just got anyone from STC Initio, but we've got their CEO, Mark Rushton, who will tell us a bit about what they do. Now, as I say, STC Initio are an Areg member, and they utilise various platforms to help businesses realise opportunities and solve underlying problems. And so with that, it's over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Rod, and good afternoon, folks. It's a pleasure to talk to you this afternoon at this kind of first inaugural Professional Services Network meeting. I work for STC and CISO. Rod was close enough. And for my sins these days, I'm CEO. So yeah, the theme of today, I suppose, is very much in our sweet spot. I represent an organisation that's got a slightly more colourful background than most. We've got 5 ex-senior murder detectives on the team who have done things like convict Nat Fraser of murder twice and got involved in several other very gory criminal incidents, right through to being the first officer on Piper Bravo the day that Piper Alpha unfortunately exploded. So we've got a real legacy and background in, as Rod said, that mitigation, that control of risk. But at the same time, risk can't paralyze organizations, and it's also about doing the things that put you in the right place to realize opportunity as well. And this is something that we've wrestled with for a very long time. And our interests in joining Areg were, I guess, similar to everyone else's on the call. We listened to the noise for quite a long time. We became very curious about how what we're doing in other places might be applicable in the renewable space. And as we got active in more and more sectors, we came to that conclusion that Rod outlined earlier in his introduction, that actually, you know, good core skills are applicable regardless of the industry or the technical capacity in which they're being applied. And the topic I'd like to delve into today, which sounds really boring on the face of it, but actually is something that's all around us every day, is around what we call root cause learning. And root causes, by definition, are these things which ultimately lie dormant and only become active when an incident happens, or when a non-conformance happens, or something happens that isn't everyday business for a person or an organisation, and has an unfortunate side effect or outcome. And keeping these things dormant is the name of the game, because when they do become active, depending on the environment that you're delivering in, they can have fairly catastrophic financial or worse still, people or environmental consequences. So I'm going to go through a short presentation today. Happy to do a little bit of a Q&A on the back of it, just to kind of explain where we've got to in terms of what makes for good root cause learning, and explain one or two of the tools that are have been developed and are active along the way. And just before I do, a tiny little bit about us. We're quite a diverse organisation, but essentially, in a nutshell, we build software and deploy people in kind of just the right proportions, we hope, to help organisations to either utilise those software platforms or utilise those people services to get to a place where they're comfortable to operate in the way in which their shareholders and their boards and their people hope to happen. So I won't go into any more kind of salesy stuff. I'd like to get into the topic, and we'll see if it generates any debate on the back of it. So let me just ask that most common Teams question. Can you see my screen? I hope the answer is yes. Good. Thumbs up. And I guess the kind of headline to this is around transferable skills, and I'm guessing Rod and team, that a lot of the future sessions looking at other things are going to be around, well, is this transferable? Is this going to add value here? Is this something that's being done already? Is it even relevant to the sector and what the sector has lying ahead of it as it matures and becomes a more dominant source of energy? And I guess what I'd like to explore today is whether root cause learning has that place in this sector going forwards. So a little bit about the kind of heritage to this. So as I said, we've got a very interesting team in terms of their backgrounds. We're constantly recruiting, so it's extremely difficult to get people right now, which tells you just how buoyant the market is. But currently the investigative team of over 400 combined years of doing this stuff in a live environment, either in a criminal or an industrial capacity. We are doing this stuff all over the world. So before COVID, we were in around 20 countries a year. Since COVID, we've been in about 3, but that's now starting to open up again, and those investigators are now deploying all around the world. And in our client environments, we think we've got around 5,000 investigators now using the software and the methodology that we work with. We have a team of about 10, but the rest all belong to the clients that utilize the tool. And what that means is that typically we're dealing with collectively thousands of investigations, which in turn generate many more, and sort of a 5 more factor of root causes, and they generate, equivalently more preventive actions and outputs which are designed to stop recurrence of that bad event. And what that means is that we are privileged in that we have access to a huge data source in terms of what these root causes are telling organizations. And one of the kind of underlying, if you like, pillars of the way we do business is that we're very happy to collaborate, and that means non-financial as well as financial collaboration. So if we can do something in this network that gives something back for the greater good in terms of the data that we can potentially unlock, in terms of where other businesses have had particular pain points or particular root cause clusters, then I'm more than happy to broker those conversations on behalf of the group to get access to some of that data. We're talking to Oil and Gas UK just now. We're talking to Water UK. We're members in ESA, the Environmental Services Agency as well. And we have partnerships with Lloyd's Register, with Cummins, with McDermott globally, where it's all about giving something back and ultimately sharing some of the knowledge that we accumulate along the way. So definitely want to contribute to this group, not just in terms of generating commercial opportunity, but also in terms of potentially giving something back if we possibly can. And we reckon there is a calculator for this. It isn't just a random number that I've picked out the sky, that by doing this stuff properly, the network around the world that use it has an ROI of around $200 million and counting in terms of the savings they generate, either through preventing significant safety failings, environmental failings, business failings, quality failings, or security breaches. And those are the main areas in which we tend to apply what we do. And we've got a number of people in this space, and I've put a few of them up there on the board just now that work with us in this discipline. And again, if there's things we can do to connect people and connect like-minded professionals, we've got what we call our COMET user group and our COMET steering group. I would be more than happy to make those connections. Interestingly, we're doing this in the AI space with Network Rail at the moment, and they do an awful lot through the RSSB and the Marine Accident Investigation Board as well with Lloyd's, which is all about connecting those key industries and organizations so that they learn from each other before the next bad event is allowed to happen. So exciting times, I guess, in terms of what we can now do with data as well. Okay, so let me just briefly explain the intelligence that sits behind what this is all about. It's called COMET, and COMET, despite being a pretty funky name, is an acronym, and we hate acronyms in our organization, but this one's really good, so we let it stay. David, you mentioned a few in your introduction there. I have no idea what they were. You'll need to explain to me later what they are. But I wasn't going to put my hand up, and as Rod said, ask the stupid question. But in our world, COMET stands for Communication, Operating Environment, Management, Equipment, and Training. And what we did through about 10 years of research prior to COMET becoming a live product was we tested to destruction whether an organization could have a root cause that fell outside one of those categories, and we couldn't find one. So nestled into COMET's taxonomy is this plethora of organizational root causes, things that go wrong when something is allowed to turn into consequence, or if something is identified as a mistake or error, and they all fit into that taxonomy, which means we can roll it back up and use it from a big data perspective, which is really important as well. So it does what it does through enabling organizations to learn. Its heritage is obviously, as I've explained, deep rooted. The people that do it don't do it just for the money, they do it because it's a vocation, and that's really important when we're recruiting, and it is creating this new standard in preventing failure. And we've now began to evolve the thinking, and we couldn't possibly call it root cause learning until this new thing came along, and it's very new. So I want to just kind of test this with the audience today as well. It's all very well waiting for the horse to bolt and waiting for the consequence and investigating that and finding out why it happened, but it's too late because it's already happened. And what that meant was that up until about 2 months ago, COMET was only ever wheeled out in response to something. It was reactive. But we've been working with Harbour Energy and with Viridor, who are partners with Vattenfall, and with a number of other trusted partners to develop COMET's capability in the proactive space, so that when you identify a non-conformance as part of your assurance, your audit process, your inspections, you can actually do an analysis on that before the root cause ever gets a chance to exhibit consequence. And if you pair those two types of things together, you get a much more deep and an accurate outcome. And therefore, it becomes all you need all the time, instead of being something you need only 5 or 10% of the time. So that's been the thinking behind it. And underpinning it are 3 core truths. And this is really important as we get into the meat of the presentation here. Root causes, by definition, never ever occur in isolation. So it's very common when something bad happens for everyone to look for a silver bullet. We see it in politics all the time. Something goes wrong in politics, he or she was to blame, or that was the reason it happened. And that's never the single reason why it happened. There's always a range of things that accumulate together to create that eventual outcome. So they always occur in small clusters. Secondly, they don't have a hierarchy of seriousness. So in your own businesses, when you're thinking about preventing a really bad event, make sure you spend time understanding the not so bad events, because those root causes that manifest themselves in a cut finger, if you leave them unaddressed, can be the very same root causes that result in a loss of arm. What might be different might be luck, might be circumstance, might be the job that you're undertaking, but the underlying root causes will still come back to COMET and the taxonomy that sits underneath. And finally, and the one where we hope that the renewable sector has got the same opportunity for payback as the sectors that have gone before it, is that root causes don't change based on failure type. So the most common application for this kind of stuff is health and safety. The art of keeping people out of harm's way, or in the oil industry in particular, or the waste and utilities industries, keeping pollutions out of water, and whether it be clean drinking water, or whether it be our oceans, or whether it be our rivers that we enjoy to fish and all the rest of it. But these same root causes manifest themselves across the complete spectrum of failure. So they're active in environment, they're active in security, in business, in projects, in all sorts of other areas. And by broadening that lens, it costs you no more money, but you ultimately get a much bigger understanding of where your organization's danger spots lie. So if those 3 truths underpin what we do, and if organizations buy into those, we've got a great chance that our partnership's going to be successful. So what we're talking about here is actually marrying up what you call your proactive strategy and your reactive strategy. So on the proactive side, all of the renewable operators and all of the tier 1 and tier 2 contractors that support them, either in the design or the construction or the operating stages of what they do, will all do stuff like this. They'll all audit, they'll all inspect, they'll all have assurance programs, they'll all have safety observation programs, they might use learning teams, they'll do health checks, and so on and so forth. And then ultimately, those have got root causes in them which are dormant, and that's where root causes should be. We identify them and we act on them. But unfortunately, in a lot of cases, when we investigate, we find that what has happened was identified in the proactive space, but the organization was too busy and nothing was done about it. And so acting now when they're dormant is the key thing. Because when we get involved on the reactive side, we're investigating incidents, we're doing incident management, we're doing reporting, we've sometimes got regulators to work with, we've sometimes got the law to work with. We've sometimes got the police to work with. We've sometimes got other jurisdictions to work with as well. Sometimes it extends, as Rod will tell you in his world, outside the UK, and that becomes very complicated. And these affect failures, disputes, non-conformances, and health and safety incidents. And unfortunately, in serious cases, they end up in prosecutions, and they make a lasting impact on the lives of the people that were involved in them. And those are active root causes, and we want to get rid of as many of those as we possibly can. And we see it weekly, monthly. It was only last month I was working on Dublin Port, and I was giving graphic details of the last fatality they had there, and all of the findings from that fatality were identified in here and could have been acted upon. So really, really important stuff. So what we need is joined up technology that takes the two things together. We need a consistent way of analysing what comes out of both buckets, if you like. We need to understand crucially, and this is where I think the oil industry has been a real pioneer. It wasn't the pioneer, it began in aviation and among fighter pilots and commercial pilots, but human factor analysis has become more and more important. Understanding the underlying reasons why human beings make mistakes before you just point the finger of blame. You actually get that data before you go into root cause analysis. And then we need to stop looking at this stuff from a single point of failure perspective and start looking at big data. What's large sources of data telling us, and what can we learn from it, and what can we do about it? So AI and machine learning has become much more prevalent in this space as well. And if we can get all that lined up, then that takes us to a point where we've got some genuine opportunity to learn from what we are operating daily, weekly, monthly in our organizations, and indeed in our wider supply chains. So I'm not going to go into all the detail. We haven't got time for that, but let me just flick through what some of this stuff looks like in reality. We have an ecosystem around the software, which on the reactive and the proactive side can be configured by organizations that want to use it. It investigates, it does analysis, it creates preventive actions, it tracks, it APIs to other software, and ultimately it provides all the modules that make up that previous slide. You need a consistent way of measuring. And so, as I described, COMET breaks down into 12 subcategories and ultimately 62 root causes that are uniquely tagged and coded so they can be rolled up and understood from a big data perspective. So communication breaks into verbal and written communication, and then breaks down further into very specific communication characters. Management systems move into task supervision, task planning, task learning, and so on and so forth, and then into those much more granular root causes. And by having that consistency, we are then able to feed into a consistent output, which in turn will give us much broader organizational learning. And then the human factors piece, which is really important. It's got to be able to be used by people that aren't human factors experts, because that's really complicated, and you have to be chartered and you have to be part of various organizations. It has to be something we can all use. And the UK Health and Safety Executive have published their own performance influencing factors, which look at why a human being might have made a mistake, either in the job themselves or as individuals, or in the organization that set that regime and job up. And we've embedded a process in here called the IDA process, which enables us to get to those outcomes before we enter into the root cause analysis process. Again, we won't take time to go through that just now, just because there's no time on the presentation. But what that does do is that encourages organizations to be more open, more honest, and to report better, because it aligns to just and fair culture. And you'll find in any legally privileged investigation that you get involved in that it's often very difficult to get to the truth, because people clam up, they close up, they distrust the process that they're involved in, they think they're going to get blamed. And as a result of that, organizations never get to that true depth of learning that they want. By having an HF model, you're saying to the human being, we're going to understand why these errors were made, and we're going to change our regime so that you're not pressured into making them again. And that ties in with, as you can see, NHS or Network Rail or HS2 or any of the oil majors that have these just and fair culture models, which is really important. And big data piece is increasingly more important. So quick illustration here. I want to leave 10 minutes for Q&A if we can, but what if we could gather together hundreds, if not thousands, of these data points, analyze them using that structured methodology, help isolate the systemic ones the 20% of bad actors that give big organizations 80% of their pain, and then prioritize them first, make them the low-hanging fruit so that all the mavericks become much, much easier to get after. And that's what we call the 20/80 rule. By providing codes on all the data, you can roll it up, you can identify the systemic bad actors, and you can go and do ultimately something about them. And what that means is, using these codes, you can slice and dice this data any way you want, across any discipline that you want. And that means that you can make informed decisions on ultimately finite amount of money that you've got to spend on putting these things right. You know, a health and safety director might only have a budget of £250,000 or £100,000 a year to improve safety right across his or her organisation. They've got to know where the pain is to go and spend that money wisely on the right stuff, which is really important. Here's a series of rigs here, and you can see that certain regions have got specific issues. In other areas, those issues are common across all 3 operating regions. And again, you can do a number of different clusters here to get to that data. So ultimately what we want to get to with this is a point where, when a renewable energy project is being commissioned or being operated, you can ultimately type in a key at-risk activity. It might be scaffolding, it might be grid works, it might be pipe laying or cable laying, and then ultimately something will come out the other end that will tell you where the risk associated with that is before you actually go and undertake the task. And not only where the risk is, but where the risk is physically made an impact on those operations in the past, perhaps in your industry or perhaps in others, but ultimately stopping people making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And these reports are all bespoke within the system, and they can be used in lots of different ways to help you understand that data. So all about risk control and ultimately where we want to get to. So it's very difficult to achieve, but ultimately if you can isolate and address your systemic causation, and you can achieve incident reduction at the leading indicator stage, not the lagging, you will ultimately be able to get there. You've got to put the effort in to identify this stuff in low-level events, so the bad event doesn't ever happen, and you've got to be able to risk profile these high-risk activities before they ultimately start. But not an easy thing to do, but we're starting to get into this environment now with some of these more mature organizations, that when they get all this right and they deploy not too much software, not too much people, just get it right and get it light enough touch that people can use it, then this stuff really is possible. So there's a little bit of a summary, and any questions?
Hi, Mark. Thank you for that. That was fascinating. And I've got to say that the insurance industry should be all over your product. They should be very interested in it indeed. And just on that, I mean, are there any cost savings to be derived by a business? I mean, if they were to flag to their insurance company that they're going through this, you know, root cause analysis journey with you guys, is that something that's recognised by them as something that could lead to a cost saving for the business?
Yeah, yes, it is. So our biggest global user is Cummins in the automotive space. They deploy in around 190 countries, and they actually, for part of their business, they self-insure because it's cheaper for them to do that. But for the other half, there's an ongoing monthly dialogue with their insurance brokers on the root cause analysis work that we're doing, and that does have an impact. Although interestingly, we've never cracked the insurance industry, and we don't know why. There's also a facet about getting to the unabridged bare truth that scares organizations a little bit in that field, and it's not been something that we've landed entirely successfully yet, but we do help clients negotiate with their own insurance brokers based on what they're doing.
Thank you, Mark. That's very, very interesting. And I mean, are there any questions from anyone else, either for Mark or for David? Feel free just to come off mute, and I don't see any questions in the message box, so feel free to just come off mute and ask your question directly. Thank you.
Rod, Jean Morrison, can I ask a question? Thanks very much, first of all, for the presentation. It was really, really interesting. And I was wondering whether or not the software that you spoke about, the COMET software you spoke about, would that be suitable for small organisations as well as large organisations, and also not just oil and gas and not just oil and gas and renewable organisations?
Yeah, so we've got a smaller baby tool called COMET Essentials, which is exactly for that. It's significantly more cost effective, and it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but it's designed to get smaller organizations to the right outcome quickly and cost effectively. And absolutely, it's not an oil and gas product. It's probably got slightly more oil and gas supply chain users than anything else, but being based here on Waterloo Quay, that's not a surprise. But the most recent growth around the product's all been outside oil and gas. So it's oil and gas, utilities, automotive, marine, a number of different spaces.
Okay, that's super. Thanks very much.
If nobody else has a question, I will just come in also just to say excellent presentation, and also I think some of the ground that you touched on sort of covers that sort of cultural piece, the culture of working organisations, and I think given what we've just experienced over the last sort of couple of years, I think there's been a lot of challenging just in terms of what represents a sort of commercial structure, commercial operations, you know, the whole sort of home working piece. So there's probably a whole lot of new stuff that's being introduced into how the working world is going to look like in the years to come. Just on the sort of, I guess, the mind safety side of things, is that something that you're seeing a development with, an increased interest in just that whole sort of culture of an organisation and how we're bringing through people and sort of looking after not just their physical safety but the mental well-being as well?
Yeah, there's a whole movement in that space just now, David, and we're ECITB and IOSH accredited as well on the training wing of the business, and that's something that Craig and his team are doing a whole lot more in. Again, it's now not acceptable legally in the same way as ED&I's become such a growth thing, and ED&I is very much following the same journey that safety did. We're moving from something that was a nice to have for really forward thinking organizations to now being something that's expected if you want to tender for anything significant. And I think the cultural piece, particularly the safety critical cultural piece has evolved massively in the last 10 years in particular. More often than not now, corporate programs in this space spend an awful lot of time looking at emotional intelligence, looking at well-being, ultimately looking at what goes on outside work as well as in it. And you even see that in the context of the investigations we get involved with now. There's as much focus on what people do outside of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, as there is what goes on in it. So there's a range of different influences there, but most definitely now the duty of care around the human being's never been higher than it is now. Although that is not the case globally. We're still nowhere near that in some of the environments that we operate in. Nowhere near it.
No, that's really helpful, Mark. Thank you very much. I'm just going to flag, and I don't know if Andy wants to come in here, but Andy Watson is on the call from the Marine Rescue, the MRS training, which is the former Mines Rescue outfit. Andy, do you want to come in just a little bit in terms of your view of the sort of safety provision and the sort of areas of work that you're also looking at? Because I think some of this is very complementary, and I just wanted to make that connection if possible with the time we have left.
Yeah, no problem. The MRS Training and Rescue are the trading name for what was the Mines Rescue Service. From an industry heavily involved in good old-fashioned carbon to moving into a training and rescue provision for all industries now. Essentially, safety has been our culture since 1903. So keeping people safe is an essential part of our kind of remit, if you like, whether it was in the coal mining industry in the past, or whether we move forward to where we are now with oil and gas, waste management, renewables. I mean, you name it. It doesn't matter what industry that you're in. Safety culture is extremely important. And you know, on Mark's presentation there, you know, the stories of you're identifying your root causes and trying to identify them before they become active. You know, there's a story in Mines Rescue, if you like, is where we were a reactive service, but as the mining industry kind of developed through the Industrial Revolution, the role of mine rescue shifted from being go in and facilitate the rescue after it has happened, after the tragedy has happened, to what can we do, what can we put in place to stop it from happening moving forward. And that's been very much of our culture. And as we've moved through, whether it be, as we've came out of the mining and gone into the kind of, confined spaces and working at height as our kind of bread and butter, there is a lot of industry out there from a safety standpoint who are playing catch up, essentially. They're still dealing with the kind of reactive side of it and not so much focus on what can we do before it becomes realised. And I thought, Mark, your presentation was really interesting, and having a system in place that essentially does that thinking for you is a really, really useful tool. I know that wind turbines in particular, with it being a very young industry, if they can get a head start on that type of identification would be amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, we did some work with BayWa. I don't know if anyone's worked with BayWa yet, the German wind turbine manufacturer based out of Edinburgh. They're doing a lot of wind farm, smaller wind farm delivery and deployment around the east and west of Scotland. But yeah, we went in there, Andy, and I have to admit that I was quite taken aback at just how early they were in their safety journey. It was pretty basic stuff, but by their own admission, that's where they were, and they're rapidly catching up.
Yeah, a big talking point from what we've seen in the wind industry is that crossover between as a turbine generator hub in the cell classed as a confined space.
Yeah.
And by pure definition, from what it says in the law, it is. But whether you would class it as a low, medium, or high is what the industry is trying to fathom out at the moment. And there's been a lot of discussion between an organisation called Safety On, for example, trying to create some standards for it, which have kind of, it's been positive, it's been negative, it's been positive, and now it's lying kind of floating in the water a little bit. But again, looking at the COMET system that you offer, I'm pretty sure if you were to put that conversation through it, they might come out the other end realising that they've got some work to do.
I had another question there for you, Mark. Thank you for that presentation. My name is Thomas Carg. I'm with Marks and Clark, a law firm like Rod, except we specialize in intellectual property. So like Rod was saying, service providers are all about sort of increasing value and mitigating risk. And for us, that value comes from intellectual property. So when you talk about your product, COMET, of course, I'm thinking about the goodwill and the name and the trademark, but I was more interested in when you showed that sort of, I assumed it was illustrated, that kind of schematic with the different microchips and the different components, and you talked about API and interfacing and these different elements, that how much of your underlying software has been developed internally and do you really own, and is it kind of a black box that you kind of provide to customers through some service agreement, or is it outsourced, or how do you sort of go about protecting that, as it is such a big part of your business?
We were STC Global up until a year and a half ago, and we acquired a software developer called Inciso that had built COMET for us. So all of the COMET development is built in-house, but we also build other people's software dreams. And Thomas, that's another whole area. So the likes of Zinc 360, who are specialists in digital twinning, and eBar that are producing these beer terminals that you can pour your own pint that's at sports venues. We're the software inside it, but we don't have any of the IP. But on our own products, it's all built in-house. But you're right, we don't just live in isolation. We live in these ecosystems where we have to connect to other systems. Sometimes it's Microsoft, it's Power BI, or it's Tableau, or it's Maximo, or SAP on the enterprise reporting side. But more often than not, there are kind of four systems in our world: Enablon, Intellex, Synergy Life, and AIRSweb, which are the four major proprietary EHS platforms that companies use to manage their safety, essentially. And we have to be trusting enough that the IPs of the two systems are going to be shared, and you've just got to get on with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I dare say we lose some value along the way, but I don't stop long enough to think about that. It's one stress I could do without.
Well, that's really fascinating, guys, and conscious of time, and that I promised we'd finish by 3, but probably time for another quick question if anyone would have one. If not, that feels like a
Rod, not a question. If I can just jump in very quickly, just to take the opportunity to flag that we have a calendar competition up and running for Areg, and as folks go off on their summer breaks, if they haven't already, if you have a look at the Areg website, you'll see details of our photographic competition, which we encourage all members and non-members to have a look at, and encourage some engagement with that. There's some great prizes, and we've got some great sponsorship as well to do this again another year, and it will result in the Areg annual calendar for next year in actual fact. So commercial over, I'll hand it back to you, Rod.
That's fine. And just to continue in the commercial theme, I'm not sure how many of you are actually members of Areg or your businesses, but I mean, you're welcome regardless on future network events, but it really would be great to see more of your businesses taking up membership with Areg. It's a fantastic organisation. It's there to enable your business to get a foothold in the renewable sector. It's there to facilitate the supply chain's access to work and to work with operators to ensure good practice, best practice throughout the industry. So if you're not already a member, I urge you to continue to consider it. Have a look at the website. It's a very reasonable amount every year. I'm starting to sound a bit salesman-y here, so I'm going to switch off now, but really it is a worthwhile thing. And also please keep an eye out for our next session. I really enjoyed that today, and they'll get better and better as we get more practice at it. And also keep an eye out for our conference, our first exhibition and conference in November. Again, details of that can be found on our website. And a huge thanks to all of you for attending today. It's really appreciated. Thank you, particularly in the holidays. And also, last but definitely not least, to David and to Mark for their contribution to today's session. And if there are any ideas that you have for future sessions, as I say, this is meant to be a collaborative, a cooperative group. Please let me know, or let Beverly or the team know, and we'll do our best to kind of try and make that happen for you. But thank you all very much for attending today.
Thanks, Rod. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, David.